Thanks for joining us on today's edition of Newsnight, where we talk to some of the major actors in the national drive for growth and development. I am Ladi Akinrinade. Today, we return to the state of the nation in terms of issues of security, restructuring, and other challenges. My guest is elder statesman and former Chief of Army Staff, General Alani Akinrinade. General Akinrinade, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Newsnight.
You're very welcome.
Now, you celebrated your 80th just a little while ago, and I wanted to use that as the peg to ask you what your general comment is about where Nigeria is as a country today. You were one of those who was there at the start. You fought in the Civil War. In fact, I read the book by General Alabi Sama, who detailed a great deal of your role in the Civil War. And then you've been active thereafter, rising to the top of your profession as Chief of Army Staff. So today, where do you think Nigeria is as a country?
Well, thank you. But, generally, I think everybody who lives here, and especially my age group, we know that there's a lot of disappointment where we find ourselves, that we ought to have been where the Asian tigers are by now. In fact, we're slightly ahead of them. And it's more painful if you grow up in the West, in particular in the west of the country, because the leaders raised hope all the time. They try to get the people to believe that we are bigger than what we are, that we can do better, and they had long vision of what they want their people to be. That is where I grew up, and that is why I'm fairly disappointed now that it's a federal structure, and we're all one Nigeria now. In fact, no state is independent. No state can do very much on its own. Therefore, we all focus on what Nigeria has become. It's very disappointing where we are. We had bigger hopes than what we are having now. It's always now we talk about a country that has everything, that has all the potential. We're always talking about potentials. We have not really seen what the reality should be. And that goes squarely on the leadership, but also the led, because also if you look very closely at the whole structure of our society, you will always find that you can apportion blame to virtually every strata of it. But the main problem is the leadership. They have failed very woefully, especially since about 1970.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the leadership and you mentioned 1970. 1970 was the year the Civil War ended.
Yes.
And it marked a watershed because at that time, all what was described as potentials for the country were supposed to now manifest, that we had settled at the time the issue of nationhood. And of course, you were in the security services at the time, rising through the ranks. So where do you think in particular we went wrong? Because in 1970, the world was Nigeria's oyster, so to speak.
Yes.
Everybody expected that this country would blossom because we had everything at the time. So where did we go wrong?
I think the very first thing that happened to us was the truncation of the federation that we had before, the constitutions of all the constituting states or regions of that made up Nigeria were all revoked. And that was in 1966. That's when our problem started. However, General Gawan, when he got there, had the best of the country with him. Virtually the best of our politicians, our technocrats, our professionals were all assembled by General Gawan. And therefore, we had we didn't notice the bastardization of the organization of the country, simply because that group did marvelously well. I think they laid the foundation for, in fact, a greater Nigeria, except that when Yaragawa himself got taken over by some cliques, whoever they were, trying to convince him that he could reign forever, and then they started dilly-dallying about return to civil rule. I think that is where the major problem really started. Then, of course, when he got kicked out, the succeeding government also started by destroying the civil service, all the institutions that had been created before independence, during independence, up to the time of Gawan. All of them were attacked and really destroyed. I'm talking about the civil service, the armed forces, the police, the university system, and all that kind of. So progressively, we started retarding on the understanding, I think, that the federal government thought they had so much money coming from oil now and that kind of thing, and therefore they can do virtually anything.
The famous
and the
statement
states,
that we had so much money we didn't know what
and
to
the
do.
states cannot, the regions cannot really do anything. That's what led us to dismantling them and creating 12 states. I think when Gawan created 12 states, it was see a much better opportunity for us. But when we thought we saw the money and we can just go and spend that money creating extensive civil service, we were just going ahead creating all sorts of things which were almost useless.
General, when you mentioned that, there was an attack on the institutions, many people would have expected you to exclude the armed forces because the armed forces was in power.
But don't forget that we removed the crop of our senior officers in one false sweep, just like that.
Okay.
As soon as Gawan got out, all the governors was military governors. They were our seniors. They are the people we are relying on, who in fact wanted Gawan to return to us once the war was over, and you could replace them with civilians. There were plenty of civilians, qualified civilians, who could have done it. So we wanted them back. All of them were removed to demand. And that set the pace for succeeding government to believe that the first thing you do is to remove all the people either who are senior to you or who you think can cause you problem. So that attrition continued in the armed forces, in the police, even in the civil service for many years. I'm not sure that it's not even prevalent now.
Now, so if this then happened, but in 79,
yes,
administration was then handed over to the civilians, and the military returned to the barracks. And one expected that, having learned from the experience that led to the 66 events and so on, that we were now back to democracy. But again, it didn't happen that way. It was during that period that you were Chief of Army Staff, and then you were subsequently retired. Was this part of the attrition that you just described, or was that normal? Was that you just leaving the service as expected, having reached the top?
Yeah, by the time I became Chief of Army Staff, the spate of retiring people unnecessarily stopped, simply because I was senior to virtually everyone, apart from my deputy. I was senior to everyone else in the forces. Those who were with me, like in the Navy, Abdullahi and the rest of them were classmates. So there was no big deal about retiring people. And the civilian government was not really, except one very terrible mistake Shagari made by retiring the chiefs of staff and a few people under me, even without asking us to meet in the council to be able to check whether these people really need to leave or we could leave them. Some of them I thought were those I was going to rely on to help me to hold the army, but they got retired. Apart from that, there was nothing really that happened during the civilian regime, which continued the spate of destruction of all the institutions. I don't think he didn't do anything about the civil service. If people retired, they retired on their own. I, for one, thought at some point, after that spate of retirement he did, the few people who retired there, and the kind of feelings I was having about the people I work with. I have to work with the president, I have to work with his ministers and things. At some point, I felt, no, I was becoming a stumbling block. You have to trust your chief of defense staff. He has to come to you, he has to brief you. When you have to tell him also what you think you see or feel. Once that confidence is not there, and it's no point sitting around.
Of course, he would, at that time, people would also point out that you were part of those who handed over power, and that therefore there was the natural, maybe, suspicion that those in your group tended to kind of look down on them as people who created the problem in the first place, that otherwise the army would not have had to intervene in '66, and that you were watching them now to see if they had learnt any lessons from that experience. Is that a fair?
Possibly so. Yes, it's not unfair, but if I remember well, there wasn't that kind of feeling. There may be one or two officers, but I could handle them, who might feel that the army is still in power or something like that. I had a GOC who I wanted to retire, and the president was convinced that my minister didn't want him out. So I had to tell him it's him or me. He has to get out, because he was a military governor, and he thought that when he took over a division, he has to be harassing people in the town with sirens and things like that. And I could get reports from civilians, from people there, people I respect in the town, who are telling me what was going on there. And I have never experienced that during military regime, because I was the GOC in the place. Well, one warning, the second one, he didn't stop. And when he had the effrontery to tell me that, that he was a governor before, I said, okay, out you go. But then the civilians wanted to protect him, because my governor said that when he himself was retired from the university, he was the one who helped him in the army headquarters to get some contracts to stay afloat. And I said, well, when I retire him, then he will come back to you to go and
to help him as well.
You can repay him. So that is how, the army, they had virtually got rid of those who had ambition to become anything at that level. That Babangida and Aliu and Abacha came later on. Well, that was after my watch.
Well, yeah. So would it then be correct to say that the military joining politics, as it were, or taking over government, tended to remove the general esprit de corps that it was known for, and it introduced an element of politics into the rank and file, such that the kind of example you've just given now became more and more prevalent, even within the armed forces, which was known previously for discipline?
It wasn't very apparent that there was any division at all within the ranks of the forces, except that I know most of us were mad that a lot of our seniors left, who should have helped us to put together a post-war service, which, yes, we needed them then. Beyond that, there was really no feeling of, acrimony or division and that kind of thing. I think what really killed the esprit de corps, first of all, was incidents, how coups were managed. For instance, there were officers who barely were on the peripheral, who never really participated in the coup, who got roped in. If you are my friend and I came to your house and to drink beer, and I left and joined some group and we had a coup, and somebody then said he saw you there, he saw me in your house, you become an accomplice. And so automatically we introduce a new, some new rules and things like that, which roped in a lot of people. So officers started staying away from each other in private. They worked together when it was work. But the usual camaraderie, where we go to the mess, we sit around and talk, talk shop, and enjoy ourselves, backslapping, people buy beer for each other, that kind of thing, that one virtually disappeared. Simply because 2 or 3 of us together, we might be accused by the military intelligence that we are probably
Plotting.
Plotting. Especially if you see us 2, 3 times together, that becomes a very big problem for us. I think that is where the thing started. Of course, during the most terrible part of it was when Obasanjo was the commander-in-chief. He gave instructions that no retired officer can come to the mess. So even at GOCs, the people we served, and the people like Hassan, for instance, in Kaduna, where was GOC? I couldn't believe my ears to say that Hassan cannot come to the mess and regale us with stories and drink beer with us and that kind of thing. I thought that was over the top.
You were referring to General Hassan Usman Katsina?
Yes, he was our chief of staff, and we loved him. I worked for him. And now I'm in Kaduna. I cannot even go invite him to the mess to come and talk to us or come and drink with us or eat with us or something like that. I thought that was over the top. People probably didn't notice it, but then it did a lot of damage.
Now, it's funny you mentioned General Obasanjo. Before I bring you to issues of today, yes. Now, I made reference earlier when we started to Brigadier Alabi Sama's book about the Civil War, yes. Which he said, or he described as a direct response to the role that General Obasanjo played in the Civil War, and by his own account embellished what he did during the Civil War. Your name featured prominently in that book. I'm talking about General Isama's own version of it. And the comments you were reported to have made afterwards was that definitely his own account, to your recollection, yes, was more accurate than the account that General Obasanjo gave. Do you still believe that today? Do
yes.
you still think so?
Obasanjo was a late comer to the war. He came at the tail end of it. So Alabi had been the take of it right from the beginning. Once we captured the Midwest, he was a more authentic. When you talk about 3rd Marine Commando, there were 2 people who made the 3rd Marine Commando. It was Adekunle and Alabi. Before I joined, I was in Bonny. I had an independent command of my own and this and that. But when we had to go to Port Harcourt, Bonny and Port Harcourt and the Calabar axis and the rest of them, they are in the same
zone.
We have to work together to do it. That is how my brigade joined the 3rd Marine Commando. So Obasanjo was not part of all that skirmish and troubles that we had. So Alabi had an authentic.
Let me use that to bring you to the current and then say that a lot of people ask, they said, look, the way the country is now, as you yourself have expressed earlier in the interview, where the federation that was in existence as at 1966 was dismantled because the military has a unitary structure and that was the only structure they could govern with. We need to go back to that if the country is to progress. People like General Obasanjo, in his reported comments, believe that that might be a recipe for trouble, division, and possibly maybe the breakup of the country if it is not identified properly and explained. First of all, are you someone who believes in that we need to go back to that in terms of restructuring the situation or the system as presently constituted?
Well, maybe by the time the federation was virtually dismantled and put together, we had this federal government that had almost unlimited access to resources, especially money, which they were using. When that started dwindling out, I thought we should have been smart enough to realize that this party is over and everybody should go to a stand to go and fend for himself. And we have never recovered from that mistake. If you don't allow all the various federating units to go back now to sit down and really, on their own, reorganize their homes and their business, these countries cannot go, you can't go very far at all. It's not going to go very far. So the General Obasanjo, yes, might have thought that the army is a conical thing, you come from the top down. But certainly there were enough indications from those who know, who wrote, who campaigned and talked to us about the beauty of a federation when you have all these heterogeneous communities, different languages, different cultures, different traditions, you know. But the most difficult part of it, or the obvious part, is that each one of these so-called nations had their own boundaries. They know exactly where they started and where they stopped. That it makes us very, very different from a lot of people we talk about. You talk about America, that is a big country, it's a federal system and that kind of thing. No, there are no immigrants in Nigeria. We are all indigenous people, attached to the land, culturally and traditionally attached to the land. So really, when you are talking about places like Nigeria, especially in Africa, you have to realize that you cannot erase those boundaries. You cannot erase those. It is to appear to try to erase the culture, the tradition, and the language of all these people, hoping that once you get one language, that is it. You know, in East Africa, they tried to introduce Swahili,
yes,
which they use, but they did not obliterate their original, their indigenous languages. So why do we think that these matters will just go away? It's not going to go away. It's going to continue to haunt us for a very, very long time. I think if we are smart, we must eat the humble pie. In fact, reorganize the federation. The 12-state structure was the best we have ever had. If you say that anywhere in those 36 states today, they will probably get lynched. But the point is, they cannot even pay their civil servants. They cannot run their services correctly. The education system has collapsed. And all this because we don't want to go back to realize that we have to reorganize ourselves. For a long time, we used the civil service, the army, to mop up unemployment on the street. No country ever does that and gets away with it. And so we really need to go back to the drawing board. But it is obvious what we have to do. Recognize the nationalities, put together those of them who are compatible and contiguous, and have a new system of government. Not this one. We are not going to survive these 36 states plus Abuja that takes 75% of the booty, and that kind of thing. And once they are broke, the next thing they try to do is to find ways of dreaming out some new taxes, VAT, that kind of thing, forgetting that this street is getting poorer and people are getting more agitated. We are lucky that or maybe we are unlucky, that we don't have the setting for a revolution in this country. And I keep telling people that. Because when the Yorubas rise, the Igbos will oppose them for no reason at all. The Northerners will say, okay, our booty is gone. So that is why we don't have a good setting for a revolution. We are not one people. We are Nigerian itself. It's an aberration. It's a creation for the people who wanted to exploit us, to put us together. They can make enough from our resources and that kind of thing. That's what it is. Is it too late for us after so many years to think it out and decide to do something different? I don't think so. I think we have to start at some point. We have to restore the federation. We have to get all the various sectors their responsibilities, and they should account to their people, not account to somebody who is so distant. When you go on a road, you might say, they will say it's federal road. Hell, who is a federal? I only know. I don't even, my governor is a bit even distant. The one I should know is my local government chairman or whoever is governing my local government, who is organizing the market, the farming and this and that. Not bother me about the man in Oshogbo when I'm sitting in Yakoyo now. No, but we have put the thing in an apex form, in a pyramid form. And somebody is sitting at the top and we have no access to him.
That brings us to which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? Now, right now, what some have described, some in your position, and I will ask you because you spent your entire life in security. We have a security challenge now. And some have said, do we do what you said first? Or do we tackle the security challenge and then return to this problem when we have tackled the security challenge? Some of the people who have sat in the chair you are sitting now today have said we must do both and that they are in fact linked. Which one do you believe?
I agree with them. The reason we have all these running battles all over the place is poverty. And what leads to poverty? The bad organization for governance, the non-accountability of the people who govern us. They are too distant. They are they are not part of the system. They look like people who come from Mars. And unless we solve that by reorganizing ourselves for proper governance, the question of insecurity will only expand. It's not going to go away. I read that the chief of staff was complaining about the makeup of the armed forces and the kind of equipment that are available to them, why it is not adequate to do the job which they are doing and that kind of thing. I agree with him. But that is not going to change, because I would like to ask the officials, those who are responsible, what percentage of our national income are we spending on security today? Can we afford to spend more? When I left the army, we had 3 divisions. We were even in the process of trying to whittle them down a little bit. But today, I think there are about 7 divisions. I pity the chief of army staff, how he manages to keep pace with whatever is happening in those divisions. All of them are in the front line. Virtually all of them. Because where is it there's no kidnapping in the country today? Where is it that people are not complaining about the herdsmen and thieves and things like that? And we have made it the business of the police and the armed forces to be running around the streets. Why? Because there's poverty. And there will always be poverty because we spend too much of our resources on security now. We spend a lot more on things we don't even know. When people are giving contracts, the next thing you hear is somebody being arrested for embezzling the money or something like that, So really, the system somebody has to agree that we have to really reorganize the system. Very well. I will tell you which country, I don't know which country we have crude oil, importing finished oil for their cars and this and that. And I also ask, when they tell us the whooping amount of money they spend on subsidy, and you start asking for a leader who is bold enough to tell us to our face that if this money is removed and put on roads or railways, whatever it is, in 10 years, we have a completely new transport system. The point is, when any leader today toys around with that kind of thing, the next thing we are going to say is that they will take the money and they are going to eat it up, they are going to embezzle it. That is a problem which this organization itself has created. So I'm not too sure whether one way or the other, but I would like us to solve, first of all, the organization problem, the economic system, and see whether we can produce much more, and then ameliorate poverty, and then from there on, we will soon find that whether it's Boko Haram or kidnappers or whatever, they will find it difficult to get anybody to recruit into their ranks. They have free reign just now. They can recruit from anywhere, for any reason, simply because there's poverty all over the place.
Now, General, I know that you have a farm. You alluded to being in Yakuyu.
Yes.
As a practicing farmer yourself, I want you to talk about two issues. The first is the investment in agriculture, and if, as a farmer yourself, you are seeing results from some of those policies. The second is what you alluded to earlier on, the herdsmen farmers thing, the quarrel between farmers who own farms and herdsmen who are used to having their livestock move around. First, the investment in agriculture.
Well, all the time we hear, especially from the federal government, that so much money is made available to the central bank to on-lend to farmers. I think I've not, the last time I borrowed money from there was 2008. That money has doubled in the bank today because I couldn't pay. It's still there. And I will tell you the simple reason. The maize farmer cannot guarantee the seed that is being sold. The man, just take the maize farmer.
Yes, as an example.
As an example. The fertilizer that is given, even though it's written on it, 15, 15, 15, 20, whatever, they write on it and they applies it religiously, you cannot get the results. Simply because nobody is guaranteeing the quality of the inputs in agriculture. So that is a big problem for farmers. Each time you also hear a lot of money is being spent trying to get tractors and things like that. Well, I've got one of it before through the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, but I got it from a friend in Onitsha. Not from my state, not from anywhere else. You just hear these things, but they don't really reach the farmers. When you talk about production, yes, the small farmers are producing, but half of it is still wasted. The follow-up with industries and this and that is not really adequate. So we really need to be doing. There are a lot of people who are helping us now. I mean, big farms, people who are processing cassava and that kind. They are making some difference to it. It's not enough, but people are making ethanol, starch, and that kind of thing. They are beginning to grow now to work. I hope that they don't get discouraged by farmers who cannot produce the kind of tonnage of cassava which they should bring from every acre or hectare which they farm. Once that happens, then of course they get discouraged and they start moving away again. So that is why we will have a cycle of plenty and then a cycle of want. So we really need to face agriculture a bit more squarely, a bit more honestly. It's no use telling me to get a loan and I have to go to my bank, from there to Bank of Agriculture and this and that. Then you give it to me at 9%. There's nowhere in the world where agriculture can run on 9%. It's not possible. In fact, most places is 0, maximum 1, 2%. Here is 9%. And when they tell you the amount of money you lose by management fees, something fees, by the time they put it together, it's going to be about 20%. So agriculture is a difficult sector. But if the government sincerely want to promote it, then they have to see to the, to these policies they are putting out, that the policies reach the farmers. It helps them. And, but my hunch is that it's not helping very much.
Someone like you who is in big time farming, what you allude to earlier talks about preservation also, because that's why you have seasons of plenty and then suddenly there is very little. Because there's no way of preserving it when there are plenty.
Yes.
For the periods when there won't be that many. This affects mangoes, it affects maize, it affects things that people buy, even in the cities, everything. But yet, even as far back as 1979,
yes,
the government invested in what it called the National Strategic Grains Reserve, yes, building silos right across the country, and then other preservation facilities. From your experience, is it that those don't work or that they are not enough?
They don't work. Most of it, they try to privatize them. They exist, but they are not buying. They are not buying from farmers. I'm not even sure that we have the surplus to buy now, because what usually those are for surpluses. Since you cannot sell immediately, you go to them. And in the time of want, they bring them out to the market to stabilize the prices. And of course, if our farmers are working very hard, most of the money that we go to give to troubled places, there's farming and this and that, should be products, not money. It should be products costed to help the farmers and bought and sent to Ethiopia, wherever you are going to send it to. But now we just put money in the push case and give to them. No country does that. But it's because our farming has not been organized properly. If you see the amount of waste on the farm, you probably cry. It's colossal. What is even more, even the pricing is not very, because you are selling all the time when it's available, so the prices cannot be stable. So it always goes down. When there's maize on the side of the road, everybody buys it like rotten fish. Then there will be a time when there's nothing left. So the farmers have this cyclic thing. We have to sit down and find a way to regularize that so that we can encourage them to keep producing.
How much of an impact does or has the issue of the herdsmen, farmers clashes had either on you or on people you know, or on farming or agriculture as a process? Because what those who are outside the system here is that livestock go into people's farms and destroy crops and so on, and that we are feeling the economic impact at the end of the day, because at the level of the markets, there's nothing to sell.
I think there's a lot of confusion in this. Yes, when you go to a place like Okeogun, traditionally it's our beef side. Actually, if we had been smart, that's where all the beef in the West should have been coming from. And Baba Awolowo made sure of that by creating Fashola, which is an extensive heading area. But we didn't follow it up. Time was they produced fresh milk in Ibadan. I just discovered that even the bottle they used for giving to us in Ibadan at that time was the same bottle they were using in England. The milkman in England was used to distribute milk. So that is how far we had gone. I'm talking about the 50s now. We neglected that. So we then decided to leave the matter to herdsmen, because maybe we found it cheaper or something, I don't know. But that neglect is what causes us problem now. And that is why, apart from the problem of desertification, the changing climate, the heavy population that we probably don't realize it, there's a heavy population. And as we are shouting agriculture, and medium scale, this and that, people are occupying more and more of the land. And, you know, our population is also exploding. People are building more houses. The villages are expanding. My village is about 3-4 times what I used to know in, maybe even 10 times, so what I used to know in the 50s. So all this really come into play. I'm a bit disappointed that when the federal government wanted to revolutionize herding or meat production, dairy production, and this and that, they were talking about Ruga. There's no such thing, you know, not in the West, because all land belongs to the people, and the governor is the one who can give anybody final right to use a land. So for federal government to be banking on coming to take extensive land in places, I think that was a terrible mistake. It was. There is, I know I can talk about Osun State, there are always problems between farmers and herders. What the governor did was to set up committees in every local government. So if you tamper with anybody's farm, you have to pay for it. It's not the best. It only assuages the people. The farmer who planted wanted to harvest and put it on the market, so people we can stabilize the prices, not to plant it and for somebody else to come and destroy it. No, that's not what it is. So, but it is, I know in Osun it's very minimal because of that. Because you know, even you go into somebody's farm, you are going to pay. And they have a system of enforcing it. So, but that cannot be said for all the states in the Federation, especially in the Middle Belt. There are other reasons which we are being given, where the Middle Belt is such a very difficult place to even take a position. And I always say, well, they have enough people in government, in very high offices, in the military, in the police, everywhere. So really, we should leave it to them to solve those problems by themselves. Everyone should go home and solve his own problem. The Yorubas should solve their own problem. Each of our states should solve their problem. But I don't like the idea of tarring everybody with the same brush, saying Fulani, whatever. I have a lot of Fulani friends. I know most of them will not enjoy destroying things or trying to take over people's farms and this and that. You know. But that's not to say collectively. There may not be other sophists behind it. But we have spent too much time shouting about inanities. I think what we should do to stop all this is to do herding in the most modern way. And I'm glad we have examples of people who are already doing it, even before this trouble started. The government should support other people to do it. Yorubas in particular must have a big say in how the meat, hide, and the milk production is done in our own land. We are capable of doing it. We've produced too many people in the animal sciences. We have them in. You have veterinarians and things like that, and a lot of people also who are businessmen who could invest with other people to do this thing. That's what we should face very squarely and see whether the government can give us a little more support for it. But it's no use just complaining about, you know.
As we wind this up, General, I come back to the point you made about what you described as probably the general solution, which is the issue of rearranging things. And I know I used the phrase, which came first, the chicken and the egg earlier. But right now, there is a government and a structure in place.
Yes.
And so quite a number of people ask the question, how do you make the transition from what is in place, even if it is described as imperfect? How do you make the transition from there to this other system which you and people like you have described as being better and which may help resolve the problem? Because those who are currently in the structure as it is now must play some kind of role in that transition, don't they? How do you envisage this working? Because each time people talk about restructuring the federation, I say, but you can simply take an amendment to the National Assembly and they will amend the constitution and then this can happen. But others say, no, it's not about amending the constitution, it's more fundamental than that. If it is, how do you make that transition?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems is that we don't have the leadership with the vision that says, I really want to tackle this problem. If they do, our people will get together and they will bring us a line of action, which we can. I don't think one single person can do it, but it is the leadership who makes that. I was expecting somebody like President Buhari, for instance, to have recognized all this because it's been going on for 30, 40 years. Himself had been victims of it before. I expected him to lead the way. There are documents. It's not just the 2014 document. There are other documents that are even as explicit and that lays out how you can even do it. There have been cookie commission and all sorts of commissions. If he was determined to do something about it, then you could easily have set up a small committee to bring out all this documentation and then see where we start. I don't think it's that impossible. But what I know now is that we have not got to that bottom where people will really realize that we really need to restructure the country. Maybe the word restructure has become an anathema, some red flag or something like that. But whatever it is, I don't think we have got to the bottom yet. When we do, when civil servants cannot get paid for 6 months, when we are borrowing money already, but we have to borrow more to keep our institutions going, especially the police, the armed forces, and I think then we might decide that we have to do something about it.
Many of the things you are saying are already, in fact, happening.
Yes.
So that then makes me ask you the question,
well,
if we have not gotten to the bottom, when are we going to get to it?
We are still getting somebody to borrow from. We still have money to print the currency. No, we have not got to the bottom yet. I don't think so. If we did, all of us will feel it. We will know. I think we will know. I don't think we've got to that bottom yet. And that's where we are going. Quite a number of people who are opposed to reorganizing our system. There are a lot of people who are opposed to it. Maybe they think they are prime beneficiaries of this rot that is going on here. Eventually, there will be nothing to benefit from. Maybe that's where we are going. But I think we will be smart enough someday to sit together and realize that we really need to re-engineer everything, including our political system. We really have to do so.
General Akinrinade,
it's
been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
That's News Night today. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.